Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay over the din of the fans? It's nice to be back. We'll be in town 3 times this month, actually. We came in for Lumpur Sumedho's visit earlier this month, which I'm sure most of you were here for. That was quite a special time. And this is our quote-unquote regular visit. And we're absent Ajahn Sudanto tonight. He went down to Upajjhatthana Monastery, our home monastery, for a few days. They have some special events around Lumpur Sumedho's visit down there. Him and Ajahn Sudanto, their birthdays are 1 day apart. And due to Lumpur's travel schedule, he asked Ajahn Sudanto if they could share a joint birthday celebration. So that's happening at Upajjhatthana this weekend, and I'm sure there's quite the crowd. Part of me wishes I'm there. Not the part that doesn't like 100-degree weather, though. It's supposed to be like 102 down there today or something. But Ajahn Sudanto will be back in a couple days. And then towards the end of the month, we're going to come in for the Sunday Sila program. So if you didn't get the word yet, we'll be in again on the 30th, Sunday the 30th. So tea time, we were talking about a few different things. I made some reference to what maybe I'll call perceptual or reflective meditations. It can be easy to become exclusively or overly focused on meditation, just being of a particular sort of type. But if you study the early suttas, I mean, it's obvious that the Buddha didn't teach a particular technique. And in general, he talks about the model of the mind and useful things to be developing. And the broadest sense you should have for what you think of as meditation should really be just right effort, and that's the sincere and intentional effort that you make to sort of steward your life in a way that resolves negativity and unskillful, unwholesome states of mind that are arising, and encourages and supports the skillful and the wholesome as it arises, and similarly, like, be using your self-knowledge, intelligence, and wisdom to do the things that you know will increase the rising of wholesome and skillful and good things, and decrease the arising of negative, unskillful, unwholesome things. Right effort. So it's not about a technique. It's really about taking responsibility for your life and engaging with your life in a way that you're cultivating and shaping a better present moment experience and a better tomorrow for yourself. Taking responsibility for your emotional experience of life. And meditation really plays a central role in that. It's kind of high grade right effort in some sense. You're setting aside or overcoming the hindrances and developing these very beautiful and powerful sort of faculties of mind where you're mindful, you're present, you're engaged with the present moment, you're putting aside just restless types of thinking or dull, fuzzy, low-grade thinking, or but in general, I like to promote the concept of bhavana over meditation, and bhavana is really birthing or bringing into being, or let's use the word cultivation, mental cultivation. And I think it's a useful frame to have because, to be frank, lots of nights or lots of times in your life, the conditions just aren't that great for subtle forms of meditation. And even if they are, there's a lot to be gained about pursuing other types of reflection and mental kind of cultivation. And earlier when we were talking at tea time, I made a reference to just this reflection around anatta, or non-self. And it's useful to bring these things into mind, just to reflect on your current situation or what's going on in your life. For those of you who weren't here, as I was just referring to just this reflection on, this is not me, this is not mine, this is not myself, this is not what I am. And this is something I call it reflection or perceptual meditation. And it has to be supported by many other things, but if it is, these things can be very useful, and especially as you engage with them sort of over time. There's one chant that you'll find in this book here that I've done for most of my life as a monk in Thailand. I would say on average, the monks would chant this probably a couple times a week. But it's something that I sort of took on as a reflective practice, and it's called the 5 Subjects for Frequent Recollection. And on the face of it, it seems like a pretty plain kind of reflection, but but it ends with sort of the Buddha sort of saying this is something that should be done frequently or done again and again. For one who's gone forth. So for a monk or somebody who's seriously engaged in spiritual practice, you should think about these things. And I think it's fair to call this meditation. There are forms of meditation that are very conscious sort of use of thought. Now we have to maybe kind of put an asterisk next to thought. It's not you should proliferate around this, but you should reflect on this again and again. So, and if you're not familiar with it, this kind of collection is, I'm of the nature to age, I have not gone beyond aging. I am of the nature to sicken, I have not gone beyond sickness. I am of the nature to die, I have not gone beyond dying. All that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will become separated from me. I am the owner of my karma, heir to my karma, born of my karma, related to my karma, abide supported by my karma. For whatever karma I shall do, for good or for ill, of that I will be the heir. So there's kind of 5, aging, sickness, and death, separation, in particular separation from the loved, and a reflection on the nature of karma. So we might spend a little time just kind of picking our way through these, and I can share a few thoughts about that and some of the ways that I find it kind of meaningful. It's important to note there's no sutta that I know of where the Buddha sort of then goes on for several pages to tell you how you should reflect on I am of the nature to age, I have not gone beyond aging. I have the nature to sicken. So I take that as creative license, you know. He just says, you should reflect on these things. And then you use the kind of, you know, your own self-knowledge and the rest of what you know about the values that the Buddha encourages and the elements of the path to make that a useful kind of contemplation. So, I am of the nature to age. I have not gone beyond aging. I mean, one, it sounds very kind of mundane, and I remember when I first kind of met the chant, just that kind of thing, I have not gone beyond aging. I remember thinking about, okay, well, it's kind of a bit of an extortion almost, sort of admitting that I haven't yet attained the deathless. Which I thought was a bit of a kind of downer way to sort of handle it every morning. Sort of 3 a.m., you sort of reflect on sort of like I'm a failed monk. I haven't yet sort of attained enlightenment. I'm still going to age, sicken, and die. I haven't freed myself. I haven't attained the sort of deathless. And after a while, I figured out that was probably not the way to reflect on it. It's not a good way to start the day. But these are subjects that we're kind of like as human beings we're naturally disinclined to sort of think about, especially the first four. I mean, nobody really likes to think about aging. Sickness, death, and separation from the loved. I mean, these are the things that we're kind of hoping we can skip through life and not think about. And if you think about them, you're hoping that somehow you'll get off kind of easy. Like, maybe I'll age gracefully, with little sickness, and die peacefully in my sleep, surrounded by all the things I love. You know, it's other people that get Alzheimer's and end up in what do they call them? Old folks' homes. I was listening to something the other day where they were talking about this, and there's a woman who went through this terrible, her mother had been through this terrible condition where she lost all of her mobility and ended up in an old folks home or a care facility. And it never occurred to her that someday she too might end up in that place. And in her 60s, I believe it was, she contracted some horrible sort of disease or an infection, and she ended up losing all of her limbs, like through various amputations and whatnot, and ended up in a care facility. And in the interview, she was just saying, I never thought it would happen to me. I watched my mother go through this. And I remember being just so horrified about, it was like the focus of the program was on kind of the woeful state of a lot of these care facilities where people go to spend the last part of their life, and how clinical they can kind of be, and how absence of a lot of the joyful things of life. And she was shocked to find herself kind of in a fairly similar situation, not so many years later. But reflecting on this, oftentimes I do these types of reflections in the morning time. When I first sort of wake up, it can be very difficult sometimes early morning to engage in just breath meditation. And it can be a nice way to sort of check in with these kind of contemplations. If you memorize them and you're familiar with them or something, there's something that you can fairly easily sort of bring to mind, and it gives a structure and a focus for you to sort of bring these things up to sort of reflect on. And so usually the way I engage with it, I just kind of inwardly sort of bring it up in my mind and see what kind of comes from it. So it's like kind of just holding it in mind. I say it inwardly. I am of the nature to age. I have not gone beyond aging. And part of my mind is like open to just, it's kind of like an open reflection on like, what's the nature of aging? What does it mean? And kind of open yourself up to just the truth of it, because as I said earlier, it's like we're so loath to kind of open ourselves up to just reflecting and thinking on these things. We're just, when they do come into our lives, it's usually unbidden, and we're doing everything to kind of move on to something else. We're just in this state of reacting to it. So like in the calm of the moment, or in the calm of your meditative kind of space, you kind of consciously bring these sort of things up. And doing them over time, you're really creating this kind of space to create a relationship to these very real and fundamental sort of truths of a human life. No one gets out alive. All of us are aging. All of us will sicken. All of us will die. All of us will be separated from that which we love. That which is beloved and pleasing. And so, I just kind of like raise that in the mind, and some of it is, oftentimes when it comes up, there's just this sort of space where I think, is this true? It seems pithy, it seems mundane to the kind of everyday consciousness and the flow of our kind of everyday sort of thoughts, but to create space to kind of like drink in sort of like the truth of aging. This is so true. I am of the nature to age. I have not gone beyond aging. It creates an opportunity to, both to see sort of, to check in with yourself, what that might sort of bring up, to drink in that truth, and then also to sort of start cultivating a deep and profound sort of acceptance of that sort of truth. And I would say like a familiarity with it, so that it's not something that's going to hijack you in the future. It's not some strange foreign place that you've never been to. It's actually something that you've visited sort of for many, many years, and have created kind of space to kind of come to terms with and develop some sort of acceptance of that sort of deep and sort of profound truth, both for yourself and for all those that you know and love. And there's other sort of dimensions of it that that can also be just sort of developed. I mean, it, in some sense, like at one point we were talking about getting up in the morning, struggle of getting up in the morning when we would like to, or when we think we'd like to, or not pursuing the things that we'd like to be doing in life or something. And these reflections can also kind of help create a space where we sort of reflect on sort of how we're spending our time, the course of our life, what we're kind of giving ourselves to, the finitude of life, the shortness of life. And when I think of aging, I just think of it as like this sort of ticking clock. It's this kind of reminder that in some sense, every day counts, and the clock's ticking, and it only goes one direction. And I'm never going to be any younger. The sense faculties are moving in one direction, decline. Once you're 18 or 22 or 25 or something like this, it's one direction. My eyesight is never going to get any better. My hearing is never going to get any better. Some of the cognitive faculties I have are diminishing. The ability for the body to be robust and flexible and comfortable, and to bounce back from all the challenges that activity and sickness and life kind of brings to it, is diminishing. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's deeply true. And it'd be foolish to want it any other way, really. It's just, this is the nature of a human body. That's not good or bad. It just is. This is the way it is. I am of the nature to age. I have not gone be aging. And here's the trajectory. And to kind of devote time to sort of bringing that into mind, growing your acceptance, and developing such kind of reflections or thoughts around that. It's kind of like a spiritual prophylactic. So then, when you get this kind of news, or when there is some sort of, you go to wash your face and look in the mirror and there seems to be a few more wrinkles than you remember. The time that you've spent sort of reflecting on that sort of really comes to your aid. It's like, oh yeah, well, I look kind of old. Maybe I am. I've read that sort of human beings really were only designed to last 30, 35 or 40 years or something. And it's largely through improvements in sanitation and health and technology we've been able to sort of double that. So I've kind of taken it on as a contemplation that I'm living on borrowed time. If you're over the age of 40, you're living on borrowed time. You don't deserve another day. I don't know why, but somehow that makes me happy. I'm kind of off the hook. Makes me feel like I'm off the hook. It's all gravy. Bonus round. Every year's another bonus round. And I don't know if it makes sense to you, but it's a skillful way to think about it rather than sort of thinking, well, no, I should live to 70 or 80, and I hope to do this, and I hope to do that, and I hope to feel like this or feel like that. And it helps engender sort of a kind of heedfulness in my day and a gratefulness for each and every day. And a kind of humility. And in some sense, like living in the forest amongst the trees and the bushes and the animals, increasingly a kind of growing sort of sense of this is just nature. This body and all the life that is from here to here, the human cells, the bacteriums, the viruses, the lice, the skin mites, whatever, the fungus, the whole ecosystem, from the top of my head to the soles of my feet. It's just like the forest. It's just a bunch of plants and trees, and every day we walk through the forest going on our alms round, and almost every day I see a downed branch, a dying tree, a dead animal. And it just is. It's not right or wrong or good or bad. It's just nature. And in some sense, we are unique beings, and there is this kind of individual karma, but in some sense, the truth of anatta is, it's not me, it's not mine, it's not myself, it's just nature. It's just causes and conditions and life doing what it does for a little while. And the more we can develop the path, then the more we're kind of cultivating that sort of freedom from aging, illness, and death. Or kind of cultivating what the Buddha called the deathless. The less we do that, the more identified we are with this body, this mind, the personality, the preferences, the pleasures, the things we're attached to, the finite things. The less free we are, the more we are bound to age, sicken, and die, especially in a psychological and spiritual sense. The more I'm identified with this and this body, then the more threatening that whole truth of aging, sickness, and death are. These first three in particular, they have, of course, a strong kind of connection. So, thinking about the truth of sickness, in one, it's like I always thought it was a interesting contemplation. It's like the difficulty in defining sort of what it means to be healthy or free of sickness is actually not all that easy. What does it mean to be healthy? It's a kind of arbitrary sort of line that we draw, really. I mean, is anyone really healthy? I mean, like perfectly healthy, completely free of sickness? No, not really. The truth is, you're all sick people. But somehow you're okay with that. And for the most part, we, all the various ailments and forms of sickness that we might feel anxious or fearful about, generally we get used to it. It's somewhat arbitrary. That you can notice this even the next time you kind of get a cold. Like, you're kind of sick, and you start to get some symptoms, and you're not feeling right, and you're not really, am I sick? Am I not sick? Or maybe I'm just a little tired, or maybe I'm coming down with a cold. And essentially at some point you say, I'm sick. Like, something happens, but it's somewhat arbitrary that you just decide you're sick. Maybe it takes a visit to the doctor, or maybe it's like you're really kind of puking your guts out, or you reach a certain state of wretchedness and you just decide, okay, I'm sick. And then the body responds, or maybe you take medicine, or something happens, and at some point the whole experience shifts and changes, and then at some point you decide, I'm over it. I'm well. And if it's something more profound, like the loss of a certain level of comfort, or the loss of mobility, or the loss of some faculty, or some robustness, or something, we still go through some sort of process of like accommodation. So, several years ago, my grandfather was in his late 90s, and he died just past 100 years old, and it was interesting to spend time with him. We always had a pretty good relationship, and I made a special effort, even though it's kind of difficult as a monk, to spend as much time as I could with him the last several years of his life. And he took all kinds of medicines. His skin was wearing out. His mobility was shrinking and decreasing. Towards the very last couple of years, his cognitive faculties were weakening. He had prostate cancer. He had, sort of a whole host of sort of things. But if you asked him if he was sick, he would say, no, I'm fine. It's just, the body was just doing its thing. So, and really our kind of, the kind of anxiety and the fear we have around these things is kind of unwarranted, because if you study sort of people's I'd say robustness and even their habits around happiness, it's relatively durable. There's nothing sort of profoundly good or profoundly bad that really sort of moves the needle that far if you look a year out beyond sort of any kind of big life change. And this is something psychologists who are interested in happiness have studied. Kind of, you win the lottery, you think, your life's suddenly going to be fantastic, or if you get in a car accident, or if you become a quadriplegic. They've studied people who have gone through such sort of changes, and for the most part, after a year of accommodation, people are back to their kind of baseline level of happiness. And it's amazing. Like, as human beings, we have something like a psychological immune system, and somehow we adjust and we accommodate, and we have the propensity to sort of worry more than we really should. And we think about aging. The reason we don't is because most people sort of think it's going to be worse than it is. You think about sickness, same thing. And the same is true of death. And they're all of a piece, really. Oftentimes reflect as, what really aging can be thought of as just part of the eventual the eventual kind of snowballing of illnesses or the loss of health and sicknesses and the loss of a robustness to kind of overcome those things. It's all really just part of the dying process. And none of it is the kind of thing that we wish for or we want, but also there's nothing wrong with it, and yet we spend a lot of our life trying to run away from it. And feeling, when we can't, feeling anxious and fearful in a way that really is unnecessary and squanders, I guess, the opportunity to live in a way that is more free and accepting, and in somewhat sort of in balance with a deeper kind of meaning in life. It's like by reflecting on these things, I think they anchor us in not squandering our life, and they anchor us in keeping kind of true to sort of certain values and virtues that are praised by the wise, but also living a life of true sort of meaning. And it's easy to get lost, and these things, as something that you frequently reflect on, I think, help keep you grounded and keep you focused on living a meaningful life. We talked a little bit about renunciation and sensuality, and this fourth reflection on the inevitability, separation from all that is all that is beloved and pleasing to me, is a great sobering kind of thought, which can really help in sort of improving and moderating our sort of investment and relationship to the sense world. It's all too easy to become overly concerned or enchanted, fascinated, obsessed, as well as anxious and worried about those things. The people, the things, the experiences that we love and treasure, that we hunger for and thirst for. And it's a wise, sobering, and humbling thing to kind of again and again reflect that, ultimately, I'll be separated from all that. And you don't know when, and you don't know how that's going to play itself out. And just the other day we had a little bit of a fright down at our monastery in California. A fire started, and they're having a bad fire season down there. It was like 5 miles from the monastery, and they were evacuating people from some of the nearby houses just 5 miles away from the monastery. And the monastery has a really high fire risk because it's very steep, and there's these grassy lands and this very flammable fuel in the forest there, and there's been we've spent a lot of time trying to sort of plan for trying to minimize the monastery burning down, but we often talk about, someday it's going to happen. Just the number of fires that there are. And it's something I've noticed, like reading about sort of ancient monasteries. If you read the history of ancient monasteries that have been around for, more than a couple hundred years, and you're sort of reading the history of the monastery, it was like, yeah, and then in this year it burnt, and then it took them sort of 50 years to rebuild this or that, and they reconfigured the monastery in this way, and then it burnt again. and it goes through changes. And like there's this one Carthusian monastery that they did a wonderful documentary was done about it quite a few years ago called Integrate Silence. And after, they don't tell you much about the monastery in the movie. It's really silent. And highly recommended. But after I'd seen it, I was kind of curious about that particular tradition and the history of that monastery. And the monastery itself was hundreds of years old. And as I was reading through it, they were talking about this building burning and that building burning. And I was thinking, oh, okay. And at the time we were so engaged in the struggle to try to just build our monastery, and so easily kind of lured by that thought that in a few years, if we work hard, it will be finished and we'll be done. And when you read the history of ancient monasteries, you realize it's never finished and it's never done. And on top of that, every once in a while, fire comes. Or there's a revolution and the Mongols come and smash the monastery, and then you rebuild, if you can. But again, we kind of hope and fear these things and do what we can to be safe and develop a sort of sense of security. But ultimately, everything will be separated from you. And it could happen tonight or tomorrow, or, we could have the Cascadia earthquake tonight. That would shake things up. Probably wouldn't be sleeping much. That's true. Well, why not? Could happen tonight. I was reading in the news recently that they've had something like 1,000 earthquakes. Well, this was last week, so I don't know what happened this week. 1,000. They have increasing kind of number of earthquakes, and these kind of swarm earthquakes or something under Yellowstone, where there's a super volcano, and it's long overdue from going through some sort of regular super eruption that would probably be a great extinction event. And there's not much anyone can really do about that. And I guess that could happen tonight as well. Probably not both. I mean, probably not going to have both the Cascadia earthquake and who knows. But there's a part of your mind that starts saying, it's not going to happen, right? And if you ever wanted to know what delusion is, that's it. People always ask, what is delusion? How do you know delusion? Well, that's how you know delusion. It's that part you say, nah, it's not going to happen tonight. But again, similar to the reflections on aging, sickness, and death, I mean, this is a great one just to kind of bring up. And it's especially good just early morning or late at night to sort of run through these, and over years, really, develop a kind of habit of visiting these kind of places and creating space and growing a sense of the acceptance of these kind of truths. And it is a prophylactic, you'll notice. over time your relationship and the clinginess and the attachment and the anxiety and the fear around separation and loss will diminish, because you've put in the time and you've grown a kind of spiritual aptitude. So, someone dies, something's lost, something's broken, something's torn away from you. It will probably still involve a certain amount of pain, but there's a whole immense level of psychological and spiritual kind of pain that can be largely absent, like when you're connected with the power of that as a truth, and of it in its fullest sort of sense, that like everything beloved and pleasing will become otherwise, will become separated from me. And oftentimes it becomes otherwise and separated from you in ways that you could have never guessed or expected, not just in the timing, but also even in the manner. Life sometimes takes a surprising turn. So, and the final reflection on kamma. We're kind of running out of time, but it's kind of multifaceted, and you can use it in many different ways. I'm the owner of my karma, the heir to my karma, born of my karma, related to my karma, abide supported by my karma. Whatever karma I shall do, for good or for ill, I will be the heir. I would say the two most useful sort of outcomes of reflecting upon that again and again is to kind of ground yourself in this kind of immense sea of karmic causes and conditions that make up and support the life that you find yourself living. Like, this present moment is not about you. It's like supported by this kind of incredibly rich stream of karmic causes and conditions. And when reflected upon deeply, and you grow to kind of see it in that way and accept it or something, it creates a kind of peacefulness and an equanimity about the things that life is kind of bringing to you. It is the way it is for reasons, and you can't know all those reasons. You can't understand all the causes and conditions that make you or anyone else who they are. And to reflect on that develops and supports the practice of growing in equanimity and acceptance. And then also that the important one I want to highlight is whatever karma I shall do, for good or for ill, of that I will be the heir. So in some sense, there is this kind of rich stream of conditions, and you should feel equanimous of what arises and manifests, but also kind of empowered that you're in this place to sort of choose your response in a way, and act as a good steward to that stream of karmic causes and conditions that you're kind of presented with. And that has an enormous effect on what it is that you'll be experiencing in the very near future, like maybe the next nanosecond, as well as the distant future. Like you're kind of stewarding and shaping, in some sense, that kind of karmic kind of stream of conditions by making wise choices, skillful choices. And if you're not, then you're contributing to a different experience. But that opportunity exists. And it arouses is kind of, what do I say? I don't want to say it empowers you, but arouses this sense of heedfulness and a kind of hopefulness. It's not a deterministic sort of thing. There's just all this kind of karma and it's manifesting. You just have to kind of suffer through it and hope for it to get better, or wait for it to burn itself out or something like this. It's like, no, I mean, you're a participant in this, and you can make an enormous kind of contribution to a skillful kind of stewarding of those conditions as you meet them. And, through wisely kind of responding to the quality of the intentions that come up, and through a growth in skillfulness and wisdom, you can make an enormous kind of change in the life. And in the language of this, like, you're the born of karma and heir to karma. So, and sometimes that can be just as simple as reframing something, or a shift of acceptance, or meeting some sort of difficult condition with patience and equanimity, rather than frustration and worry, right? It's like some negative situation presents itself to you, you could get anxious and worried, or frustrated, or angry, or something. Or you can meet it with equanimity and the sense of, like, well, the skillful way to handle this is patience, tolerance, kindness, compassion. So these are just one sort of set of reflections. There's really quite a few if you take the time to sort of look to sort of the early teachings, but this is a very kind of useful one, and if you pick it up as a frequent and regular kind of practice for reflection, there's tremendous potential in it. And I like to think of these kind of meditations as also something of a creative endeavor. Like, if you've got a basic kind of grounding in sort of the direction that the path is, the aims and the purposes of the path, which is to, ultimately grow in skillfulness and eradicate suffering. And then you can use your kind of creativity and use these kind of forms and these types of reflections to find ways to kind of support that sort of process. So, and over the years, I've just kind of grown in my appreciation for how such a kind of simple contemplative tool can actually have an enormous amount of usefulness, It's like there can be some little petty thing going on in your life, and somebody's like, yeah, whatever, I'm going to die. This is not worth suffering over. That thing I was all worked up over yesterday. I'm going to get old. He's going to get old. We're going to get sick. We're going to die. Let's not fight about it. So, I offer that for your reflection tonight.